All the formulas and functions we've looked at so far have been contained within a single worksheet. Even when we've had multiple worksheets in a workbook, we've only done formulas within each sheet that references cells within that sheet. Now obviously Excel's much more advanced than that and can deal with cross-sheet formulas. If we take our sales data 2014, we have in here one sheet for each month of the year, so January, February, March, etc., which gives us our sales for each of the 4 regions for cars, planes and bikes sold. Now we also have a summary sheet at the front, so it's currently blank, but we're going to use this to actually pick up the values for cars sold in January. So that value there, 1761. Now we could just look, come back to here and type 1761. But that in itself is not very clever, because what happens if we sell more or less even? We need the summary sheet to respond to those changes. And the only way to do that is by use of a formula. Now getting one cell to pick up the value from another cell on another sheet is actually fairly straightforward. We start with an equals. All formulas start with an equals. So we're in the cell for cars in January. We type an equal sign. We can then click on January. Click on the cell that contains the value we require, which is cars sold total in January, and then do not click back. Once you've selected the correct cell, just press return on the keyboard and you'll find we can see 1761. We know that's what the value is. When you actually look at the formula, we see equals Jan exclamation mark. So it's equals name of the sheet, and the sheet in this case is called Jan. So that's what we see, exclamation mark, and then the cell that we're trying to pick up. And in this case, that's B7. So equals Jan exclamation mark B7. Now for February, I could do the same thing. I could say equals, go to February, click on the cell. Or I can type it myself. Equals Feb exclamation mark. As long as you type it spelt correctly, then there isn't a problem. So it's equals Feb exclamation mark. And then the cell I'm trying to select is the same one. That's B7, return. And that's 540. And when I look at February, I can see that that's 540. And we can do the same for March, or we can do March a slightly different way. Equals March, click on the cell, return. We could do April in an even different way. We go to April and we can actually copy the cell that we're trying to pick up. Come round to the summary, click in here, but I can't just do paste because that will paste the value and I don't want the value. I want the link to that formula effectively. If I go to paste on the clipboard, I can choose the little drop down and we can see other paste options here. Paste link is the option I'm after. So I click paste link and we find that I actually get a formula in there. Equals April exclamation mark B7. You'll also notice that Excel has placed little dollar marks in and they're not actually required, so I can take them off. But you will find that Excel will always put those in whenever you paste a link formula. I'll use the keyboard shortcut F4 to remove the dollars. And we have April, which is actually the same as March. Now I don't need to do the other months, but you can see the logic and follow that through. So it's equals, name of the sheet, exclamation mark, the cell you're after. We can do it with the mouse, equals, and then go and click on the cell that you want and then return. Or we can use the little clever bit of copy the cell that you want and then paste link into the destination. Now, even though we're working across sheets, the formulas are still relative. And because cars, planes and bikes are alongside each other in each of these sheets, cars, planes and bikes, then in the summary, I can take the 4 formulas I've got and replicate them across. And you'll see it brings in the figures for cars, planes and bikes. And it's looking at Jan C7 and it's looking at Jan D7. So everything has moved relatively across, but the sheet tab name has not moved. That's effectively an absolute, and you cannot use copying and pasting of formulas to reference moving a sheet tab, but you can for moving relative cells. So that's one example of multiple sheet formulas. Now if we also look at the multi-sheet formula file, you'll find this has retail sales that are picking up the total sales and multiplying by a profit margin. And on the shopping sheet, it's picking up the tax, which is over here. Now, what would make the management of these files much simpler is if the tax value and the profit margin were actually held separately in a separate sheet, and we have them here as default values in the tax and the profit cells. So the tax is in B3 and the profit is in B4, but in a different sheet. So in my retail sales, let's change the one formula here. Instead of multiplying by L2 that's over there, I delete that. I've got equals B9 in here, multiplied by. We go into the default values, we click on the cell that we're after, and then we press return. It is a habit to avoid that clicking back, because when you click back, you'll then pick up two sheet names and the formula will just get totally confused. And you can see we have a single apostrophe as I mentioned earlier, because there's a space in the sheet name. And then I want to multiply by B4. What I can't do just yet is to replicate this formula from shop 1 to the total column, because it will move the reference to B4 relatively. So I need to fix B4. So F4, or you can type them in. So I'm fixing the reference to B4 on the default value sheet, and then I can replicate that formula across, which means I actually don't need these two cells here. I'm keeping the profit margin separate from the sheet in sort of a default value sheet, a master sheet. And we can do the same for the shopping. So we remove the tax from here. Everything goes to 0. I alter the first formula by removing the reference to J5. So I've still got D2 multiplied by default values, tax cell, return. Just like with the profit margin, I need to fix that B3 before I replicate. So I add my dollars in, and then I replicate the formula, and we see now it calculates using the tax value from B3 on the default value sheet. So if I were to make that change here, and let's up this to 50% so we can see that it's made a difference, look in the shopping, and we see the tax has gone through the roof. So that's multiple sheet referencing, so picking up a value from another sheet and using that in a formula on your sheet.